The same system that once raised our craft to the heights that we've seen it is now the one that's actively contributing to its demise.
It feels like every LinkedIn profile I read these days describes the person as a product leader and an AI expert, but that's another issue.
What we really need to be doubling down on is the core traits of what makes a good product manager. There are some pretty fundamental things that are wrong with product today.
Hey, welcome back to The Product Experience. I'm Randy Silver. This week, we talked to Dan Dalton about the difference between being a product leader versus a product bureaucrat, what it takes to actually earn your stripes, and how Dan and his team are adapting to new ways of working. His approach to rapid experimentation is one of the most exciting things I've heard about lately. It's something I keep bringing up in other episodes and conversations.
It's not about the frameworks. It's not about the checklists or the crutches. It's going back to the basics of how we focus on impact.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm all good. Thanks. I'm all good. How are you?
Doing well. It's an interesting week. But for those people who don't already know who you are, do you mind giving us a quick introduction? What are you doing these days? And how did you first get into the world of product?
Yeah, so I am Director of Product Management at Sage at the moment. So I've been in product management for about 14 years. I got into product totally by accident. So there was no life for me before product, which sounds weird to say, in the sense that I'm not an ex-engineer, I'm not an ex-designer, I've never been a salesperson. All I've ever really done is product-focused roles. So I started my professional career through an apprenticeship program at Hewlett Packard. So was there when product owner and agile was just settling in, rotated across a lot of large public sector and corporate contracts, with Ministry of Defense, Rolls-Royce, Deutsche Bank. Went into startups, landed at Pendo, where I was a director of product management there for all of their qualitative products. Went to a couple more startups that ended in acquisition, and ended up at Sage, where I am at the moment, where I lead Sage's portfolio of cloud payroll products. So every product across the globe that is a payroll cloud-focused product is something that I am now responsible for.
Fantastic. And you and I had a chance to sit down and have a pre-chat a couple of weeks ago, and you had some fascinating ways that you're working these days that we will definitely get to in just a few minutes. But you also have some real thoughts about how product works now, what the state of product management is today. And let's just kick off with that. It's a big grandiose question, but from where you said, what is the state of product these days?
I don't think product management as a role is in a particularly good place today. I want to be clear and sort of caveat my hot takes by saying I think product management as a skill set, as a craft, it's not going anywhere. It is absolutely essential, but I do see the role of product management being at a pretty critical juncture. I think there are some pretty fundamental things that are wrong with product today, and I think product managers ourselves need to recognize and correct those mistakes for the sake of the role being an essential one for companies in the next 10 years. When I think of product management, I think of it as on a scale, as most roles will, of where on one side of the scale you have building, and then on the other side of the scale you have bureaucracy. And I think product management at this point has sort of tipped way over onto the bureaucratic side of that scale, and sort of lost sight of what was great and what was magic about the role in the first place. When I look back, I think product management has a pretty distinct timeline of where we've gone wrong, and some pretty big things I think we can focus on to say, well, this is where it went wrong for product management. I think we started off in sort of 2010, the early stages, especially in the UK. This was when product sort of established itself as a core function, certainly with the R&D area of businesses. I think anyone who had product as a role pre-2010, you can hang your hat on and say, yes, it was a commercial-focused role. It was a business-focused role. Phil Hornby has a great story where he talks about Procter & Gamble doing product management as brand people, way back in the 40s and 50s. I think 2010 product established itself as more of a delivery role. Certainly in the UK, everyone from sort of 2010 to 2015 was thinking about story points and being a Scrum Master or being a Scrum certified product owner. I think that was sort of it being established. We then go into 2015 to 2018 for me is where product took a really big step from being a delivery focused role to a strategic role. And I think, we had empirical evidence that product management was a credible business function and a critical business function because we had unicorns everywhere. Sort of 2015 to 2018, where I think back and say, look at all of the companies that exploded during this time. You've got Figma, Notion, Shopify, Spotify, Airbnb, Uber. All of these innovators and disruptors were massive during this particular point in time. What was different about them is they were product-led. You had designers, you had product-focused CEOs who were doing things differently, raising, huge multiples with ridiculous growth and really driving things forward. And what was different and unique about them was they were product management-led. They had really core product managing functions. What I think then happened is the community of product management really rallied around it to say, we have evidence, this is how the new school do things. This is what is different about the disruptors. And I think from sort of 2018 to 2021, that's where I think things start to go wrong for product management. I'm a big fan of titles and phases, and I called sort of 2018 to 2021 the cult of best practice. To me, this is where there was a right and a wrong way of doing product management. And I think, we had evidence because you said, look at all of these billion-dollar companies. Unicorn wasn't it was a rare thing at that point in time. It's not rare anymore. We all know what a unicorn is, and we can name 20 off the cuff. But I think what we've seen between 2018 and 2021 is there become quite a tribal nature within product management, where there was a right and a wrong way of doing product management. And if you didn't align to Marty Kagan's book Inspired, and if that wasn't tattooed in scripture on your back, then you weren't true into product. One of the most divisive questions that you can ask a room of product managers was really, really prevalent during this time. I tried to look at some research through Perplexity to get some stats on this. There isn't any, but I'm quite comfortable in saying the most talked about think piece in product management was really at its height between 2018 to 2021. It's a question you can still ask a room of product managers today, and everyone gets really tense. Do you have dates on your roadmaps? What will happen is you will ask a room of product people that, and some people will get really quiet and quite sheepish, and they won't want to say, yes, my data has roadmaps. And then the other half of the room will, they'll say it with their chest out. They'll be quite confident and pleased to say, no, we use a now, next, later roadmap. That's it. Like a social signal as to really what the community at large started to care more about during that phase was how you do the work rather than the work you did.
I hate to ask, are you saying it's all Jana Basto's fault?
Well, I mean, Jana's got a lot to answer for. Some good, some bad. But I think to me, it's a signal. It's a symptom of the fact that we love content. We do love a good think piece, and we do love something to rally around. But some businesses need dates on their roadmaps. I think this is one of the things that even now, whenever a legitimate thought piece or a think piece comes out, outcomes over outputs, I think we're now numb to outcomes over outputs because it's been talked so much. We're now so familiar with the phrase of outcomes over outputs. People, again, have kind of forgotten what it actually means because everyone gets so tight. People don't think, oh, well, if I could just get to outputs, then I can get to outcomes. You stop seeing it as steps and start seeing it as skills. So I think 2018 to 2021, we really started getting quite tribal about how you do things, and it became more about the alignment rather than the actual work. I think from then COVID started to really, it just caused chaos in the sense that a lot of people lost their jobs. There was mass layoffs during COVID. Talent flooded into the market, and what you then start seeing is everyone started posting on LinkedIn. A lot of people started posting on LinkedIn, rightfully so, to raise their profile, raise their brand awareness, create the right connections, start to get work. People had bills to pay. But what that also created was a massive echo chamber. LinkedIn is an echo chamber within itself. And I think what that then started to do is, you had the rise of the, I call it the solo entrepreneur advisor coach. You get a lot of people who wanted to break free of the 9-to-5. They wanted to diversify. They wanted to raise their profile, get access to better jobs, monetize their content. But then, what we started to see is just rehashed, versions of the same content. And I think that's where we are at the moment with product management, is we've kind of lost our way in the sense that there is a commercial ecosystem. There is an economy behind the content. Everyone wants to monetize. Everyone wants to diversify. We've started really diluting the message and started focusing a lot less on the actual merits of the conversation and just more, are you aligned to one side or the other, which I think is more of a reflection on the world in general and not just product management.
That was a really kind of quick run through of sort of how product management has evolved over the years and kind of your take on that. I think what's really interesting about some of the stuff you're talking about and some of the stages that product management has gone through and kind of where it's at today is, for me, there's always like such a high expectation of product managers, like them of themselves and them of what they can do in the role, because you have to be able to kind of talk so many different languages of, you know, design, user experience, business, engineering, marketing, sales, you know, the whole kind of shebang. And it's quite a kind of demanding role. And so in my experience, people like crave that content and they crave the connection with other product managers in order to validate, am I doing this right? And are these challenges just challenges that I have, or are they challenges that everyone has? So what's your sort of, I guess, as part of that journey, what we're seeing today is that the product managers who are new coming into the market, they're coming into a lot more noise than perhaps like the three of us came into all those many years ago when we were just product managers coming into the field. So what impact do you think that has had as well on how these product managers are coming into the market? And there was sorry, I'm asking so many questions, but also not giving you a chance to answer them. But there was a really interesting stat that was in your presentation around, you know, the number of years that someone has been in product management before they then end up in like a senior exec role and a leadership role. I think it was just 2 years or something on average, which just seems crazy to me because you've barely learnt anything at that point.
Yeah, I think product management is I call it the broken ladder. And the way I frame it is that, you know, the same system that once raised our craft to the heights that we've seen it is now the one that's actively contributing to its demise. And what that sounds very dramatic, but, you know, I think there is a false economy, or there is a dynamic at play of how we are setting up people to fail, or newer product managers setting up to fail because of the economy that is behind the product management content. And I'm not anti-content, you know, I am an advisor. I am here talking to you right now. I do talks, you know, all of the stuff that I am every LinkedIn buzzword possible. It is a necessary thing, a necessary evil. But I think we have created a broken ladder for people who are new to product management or newer to product management. I think the first thing is, you know, I call it that there are 4 phases to the broken ladder, or 4 rungs, if you like. The first is framework fundamentalism. Because of the number of think pieces, the now dilution of content out there, we have created a world in which there are so many frameworks and so much divisiveness around those frameworks. People have started caring more about how they do the work rather than the work that they actually do. You know, on average, the list of essential frameworks that a product manager needs to know, these aren't, you know, either or. These are independent frameworks that product managers need to understand. The average list has 16 entries. You know, that is something that I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand where the saturation is sort of manifesting itself. But the average list, you know, you look at all of the, you know, sort of major product publications across there, the average is 16 frameworks. That doesn't account for things like heuristics, like design thinking. You know, this is specifically things like your OKR frameworks, or continuous discovery, all of the fundamental building blocks, all of these frameworks that we have in our head. So if you imagine someone coming into product management, it is just endless, the amount of things that they have to know and they have to master and they have to push things out. I think what then happens is, because we are so, you know, into frameworks and so into abstraction layers, which is the very nature of product management, we want to understand and master these techniques, but there are now so many of them. We've created an environment of where, you know, thought leaders or false prophets can step in and start perpetuating their own content and start posting things to the point of now where we consume so much content, we no longer verify or vet whether the person publishing that content is credible or is able to do so. You know, if you look and, you know, pulled a stat to say, it was 58% of the 2025 top Google search results for product management content were published by creators who had 3 or less years on average in an actual product management role. You know, when I talk to people, I use the analogy, I would not learn to fly from someone who wasn't a qualified pilot. You know, it's the same sense of where if you are coming into the role and you're consuming content, you are more likely to do it from someone who is posting without having actually earned the scars of the first-hand experience. There was a study by Product Management Institute in 2024 where they surveyed hundreds of hiring managers or people in hiring positions for product leadership roles. 92% of those hiring managers said that they would actively prioritize candidates who had a demonstrated community impact, so people who are posting on LinkedIn. In the same survey, only 54% of the hiring managers said they would look favorably on people who had a product management certification. So in other words, we are actively prioritizing or looking more favorably on candidates who can talk good about the work over people who have put skin in the game and gone out and sourced an accredited certification and spent that time.
That's an interesting one, because there's a big difference between taking a course and having done the work. And I'm all for learning from great people. I'm even more in favor of applying what you've learned and showing some results from it. It's an interesting one as well, because, I work as a coach and consultant these days, and over the last few years, especially as COVID hit, there were an awful lot of people who said, "Ooh, this looks attractive. This looks fun. Let me try throwing my hat in the ring for this." And some of them are excellent. There are some great coaches and consultants out there. There's a lot of other ones as well. And some people have had really bad experiences with people. And the first question I always ask people when they tell me that they want to get into this line of work is, I ask them, have you ever been coached well? Do you know what good coaching looks like? Because if you don't know what it looks like, how can you provide it to other people?
Yeah, it's the whole thing of like acquiring knowledge and wisdom. It's just senselessly acquiring knowledge but not applying it at that point is useful. And exactly to your point there, which is the third rung of the broken ladder, is we've created an environment where it is now too expensive to execute. What we have people trying to fast track their careers, and some people are absolutely verified in doing so because they're moving in the right career. They might be excellent people, but there was a survey. 25% of product leaders are reaching director level positions within having 2 years of IC experience. That's up from 9% when the same sort of study did that in 2015, which in itself would be alarming. But if you can imagine the jump from 9 to 23% is a big jump. Think of the number of companies and product executives that exist in 2025 versus 2015. That jump is so much more alarming. And I think part of that is due to the economy behind it, of where we all know it is easier for us to climb the ladder by moving out of a company and moving into a more senior role at another company. And people are heavily incentivized to do that, not just because of the opportunity or because of the prestige that comes with that. We're also monetarily incentivized for it. Product managers on average expect at least a 20% pay bump when they're moving to a new role. So, there are economic factors, and obviously people need to pay their bills and progress and get a better quality of life. But that progression, or that fast track progression, directly leads to what I say is rung number 4 on that ladder, which is, we have strategy theater everywhere. We have a percentage of product leaders who may not necessarily be fully equipped to be effective product leaders. There's a great study, and this is, it ticks a personal box for me, because I've always had a very visceral reaction to when people use the word strategy empty, and we are hearing a lot about strategy theater lately. So Product Plan did a study in 2025 where product managers rated the number 1 job to be done of a product manager, and their strategy was our number 1 job to be done. Harvard Business Review went out and did a study with thousands of product managers and basically asked them to define what is strategy. Almost half of the people who responded to that survey responded with their OKR framework, which means the instant reaction to half of thousands of product managers who were surveyed on the most important thing that we are here to do, their default answer was a framework. It wasn't talking about the actual process of adaptive mindset, generating, customer insights, defining a competitive position that is unique to your company and the strengths and the disadvantages that you could create. It was, I do OKRs once a quarter. I think that is quite a telling thing in terms of how product management views the work that we do and where our priorities are in some corners.
I'm kind of slightly stumped for words on that one, and just sort of want to grab hold of all of these product managers that are answering questions in this way and just be like, hey, let's do some learning together. So we're clearly, as product people, looking for ways to improve, and really needing to improve, actually, if we're trying to catch up with all this experience that we don't have and do a good job of the role that we're meant to do, which is a hard job, and it does take years to learn and to master, unless you're probably like some sort of genius. And I'm sure those people do exist, but it's probably not the general population. So what do we do about this? Like, how do we solve this problem, or how do we respond to what's going on now? Because there's even more chaos coming in now, right? With AI and like a huge disruption. We know that loads of product people have been laid off over the last few years for whatever reason, whether it's just like economic climate or excuses for economic climate and just wanting to lay people off to save money. You know, how do we respond now as product people, whether we're experiencing these challenges firsthand or whether we are business leaders or product leaders trying to kind of guide and coach people through this moment in time?
Yeah, I think we go back to basics. You know, I sort of mentioned earlier that outcomes over outputs is a phrase that I think gets bandied around so much that we've kind of gone a little bit numb to it or a little bit deaf to it. I think product is now in a position of where we're just mature enough to self-diagnose where we are as a community or as a craft. You know, again, I like to put timelines on things or cheesy names. I think product management is now sort of in its mid-30s. You know, we've hit that sort of maturity peak of where we look back on the things we did in our adolescence and thought, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Maybe that wasn't the wisest thing, but I'm all the better for that life experience. And I think we're looking back to sort of the framework fundamentalism and, you know, the perpetuating of sort of empty, you know, not all empty, but a lot of sort of rehashed pieces of content. And we're kind of ready now to correct some of those wrongs. I think impact is the word that we'll replace outcomes over outputs with. And I think, you know, Matt LeMay's book of impact-led product teams is a really good one. When I think back to, you know, Melissa Perry's Escaping the Build Trap, or I think back to sort of Empowered, those books were sort of on the right message, but I don't think we were ready to hear them. When I think back to, you know, Melissa Perry's Escaping the Build Trap was published in 2017, and all we took from that book, or at least my big takeaway from that book, was, we all work in feature factories. The reality of what she wrote in that book was that was a tiny part. Say, well, you know, you're working in a way of where you're prioritizing outputs over outcomes. So this is how you get to the point of where you can get back to actually doing strategy. I think we're now in a position of where we have economic stability, or the best we can do in terms of we're sort of 2 or 3 years out of COVID. Businesses have sort of reset to what a new normal looks like, of where layoffs are still happening, but the green shoots of funding are coming back. We're seeing funding rounds. We're seeing the talk of IPOs. We're seeing an AI accelerated survival instinct, I call it, which is what we really need to be doubling down on, is the core traits of what makes a good product manager. It's not about the frameworks. It's not about the sort of the checklists or the crutches. It's going back to the basics of how we focus on impact. And when I think about the type of content that I've seen a lot of product leaders and myself gravitate towards too, as we've progressed from sort of reading, you know, we still read all these books, but I've started to see a shift in terms of people moving from, as they progress in their career, the basics content into much more mental models and ways of thinking. And what I've started to see is, you know, when you think about some of the top, the New York Times bestsellers, I think about Adam Grant's Think Again. I think about Atomic Habits. I think about Let Them Theory. I think about Grit by Angela Duckworth. And all of these books are frequent entries into the top reading lists of product leaders. And I think what we're starting to see here is people realize that as they progress through their journey, they need not just instruments, tools, and frameworks. They need to develop the deeper traits that allow them to progress within their career. And I think that's one of the things we're starting to see, you know, a natural shift of where people taking a step back and focusing on how I should think, how I should be resilient. You know, the core traits that I start to think about there, you know, pragmatism. How pragmatic can I be about thinking about the situation that I'm actually in?
Yeah, let's dig into that. What I'm getting from what you're saying is, you know, the core philosophy, the basic stuff that, you know, Melissa did it, Matt did it, a whole bunch of other people have written really great stuff. And what we took away, unfortunately, from some of them was frameworks and approaches rather than ideas. And the ideas are solid. They hold tight. I still reference some of those things for their ideas. but I'm curious about how you apply them today. The chat you and I had a couple weeks ago, I think I've used in multiple conversations since then, because how you're working at the moment is fascinating. And I'm curious about, tell everyone else what you told me about how you're actively applying this today. What is different about a product team, about your day-to-day work and the way that you approach things?
Yeah, it's all about creating space to just try and progress your own learning curve. One of the things I've been doing, so I started off by creating sort of basic product requirement document agents at Sage, of where I could basically outsource a lot of my context and the tools that we were using, put them into something kind of like Clairvaux's Chat PRD, but much more of a local one based on our PRD framework and based on some of the ways of working we have at Sage. Inputted that content, started to show people this is how you can do this, and we've now got some agents that work across different product teams at Sage. What I then started doing was just saying, okay, well, how far can I push this? We're all using Lovable and things like that. So started to progress with the Lovable and how we push some of the more prototyping tools in. But Sage has got quite a robust platform. So I got access to our design system, exported that to JSON format, and started plugging that into the agents, and got to the point of where I was demonstrating Sage branded, fully Sage design system utilized code with components that I could then show to engineering counterparts who started verifying those things. I then got to the point of where I was by myself generating code, creating assets that were Sage branded based on all of our design system, and actually started publishing those. So I had a conversation this week, or a presentation this week, with some government counterparts. So a couple of the government partnerships we're working on at Sage on all the things accounting, and demonstrated a prototype that I created based on my own MCP server that I have hooked up to Sage's design system in GitHub, and give a complete demonstration of something that looked like a polished product. Which we've now got buy-in, and we're working on an active partnership with the UK government now.
So just to be clear, are you shipping production code from this, or are you shipping prototypes for better discussion? Are you a one-person product team now?
A little bit of both. I'd love to say I'm shipping lots of production-ready code. The reality is I've got something there which I can then ship to an engineer, and they can say, yep, this is good. So there's PR reviews. It's not back-end code. It's much more, this is what I'm working on here. You can take this as an engineer and implement it. But it's beyond a lovable prototype, which looks and feels a little bit by it. It's much more of a hybrid, to the point where an engineer can take it and plug it into the work that they're doing. So not quite a single-person builder, but much more to the point now of where we've created some systems that is now being adopted by multiple product teams at Sage, where they're using this code or using this technique to create much more robust, almost ready production items, of where we can start rolling out and fast tracking the development process at Sage.
So what you're doing is advancing the speed of the conversation. You're giving people documentation in a way that is relevant and understandable to them. Is that correct?
Yeah, and assets that they can then take to shortcut and basically trim down work that they no longer have to do.
I'm curious though, that part of the way we've worked all these years, there are definitely things that can be sped up, but part of the process that we have, as part of the friction, is having conversations, setting up some barriers to enforce thinking instead of just doing. Are we missing out on anything? Are you missing out on co-developing with other people by doing this kind of by yourself in the first instance?
I would say yes and no. The first is you look at it to the sense of where what we're optimizing for here is time to value. And in a large organization like Sage, that there are two modes of working. There's coordinative and there's collaborative. And I think in larger organizations, you can default a lot more to the coordinative. And the more you can bring people together and remove or de-risk the ability for misunderstanding, that's really where the value comes from. And in large international organizations where there is language barriers and things like that, you can't confuse a prototype. If I can click and I can feel and I can actually do, and I can take something that I fundamentally understand, a core tenet of a great product manager is to be a translation layer. You're translating technical into business technical. And I think this just adds another string to the bow, or adds a magnifier into my ability to do that. A lot of the product teams that I've been working with, and a lot of people that I sort of speak to in the industry, are now starting to adopt, even if it is just the basic livable stuff or Bolt, it's much more around how you're fast tracking towards it. I think You could also see a negative in it of where you may be removing the ability to brainstorm and bring in that information. But this is where I think we move away from sort of the bureaucratic process and more into the builders process, of where there are some organizations where the bureaucracy of forcing the conversation or doing it through, cookie cutter templates or checklists, of where it stifles innovation. Now, I look at a lot of AI products today, and there's a lot of great stuff out there, but a lot of stuff is starting to look and feel the same. And one of the things I attribute that to is, we force things through cookie cutter processes. I think people who are moving away from or slightly shortcutting time to value and maybe moving around some of the process that they work in is actually unlocking more creative ways to work. It's giving ourselves the ability to approach things from a different angle and find different solutions rather than, work within the constraints that we set ourselves.
One of the things that I've always found really fascinating about engineering roles and engineers themselves is the rate of change with engineering kind of constantly levels the playing field with that discipline, because, if you've been in engineering for 10 years, but you're not learning, you're no better off than someone who's been in the discipline for a year and who is learning a lot. And I feel like that type of thinking is coming to product management as well, where, as long as you're learning and as long as your mind is open and you are being aware of the changes around you and experimenting with new things and that kind of stuff, then you will still be relevant as a product manager continuously.
Yeah.
It's the people who aren't tuned in who will become kind of outdated in their mindsets, which kind of contradicts what we were just saying about product leaders taking 2 years to get into a leadership role. But maybe this is the new way, mode of things for product.
Product managers are really good at asking why when it comes to discovery and things like that. A muscle that I think we need to train a little bit more is asking why not, especially when it pertains to our ways of working. I always ask people, can you remember a time when you've worked with someone or you've went into a new business and you've asked, well, why are we working this way? And what they say is, well, this is just how we've always done it. Whenever you think of that person, and we've all got one, we all immediately think of the person. They were never a fun person to work with. And, they were always someone who slowed us down, or, at least in my experience, I've never met anyone who's had a positive thing to say about that person, not personal, just more in the frictions of working. I think that's something that we've got to get to. The move of Agile was a breakthrough in terms of, it took us from annual or quarterly release cycles, cloud computing, to now a 2-week sprint. And that was a total reinvention of the way we worked. Well, a 2-week sprint is now almost as painful as a quarterly release cycle for some companies. That the tools that got us here will not get us there. And I think that is something that we have to go back to first principles, which is just understanding and having a curiosity to embrace these new tools and try them. A lot of the things we do will fail, but learning from that failure will then result in, a more refined, and we can increment from there. But I think that's the core premise of, at least what I'm saying to my teams and the people that I work with, which is we need that environment of where it's okay to fail as long as we're trying and challenging the status quo. We think about type 1 and type 2 decisions. As long as you're not pushing untested code to production and there are the reasonable controls in place, then everything you do is a reversible thing. If something doesn't work, then there is a learning to be applied from that.
Speaking of your team, I'm curious. This is a different way of working. It's a different philosophy. You talked earlier about how people, not you obviously, were hiring for the ability to blog rather than actually show any results. How do you hire now? How do you diagnose the right thing in people? And then we'll follow up and talk about how you build this and develop it within your team. But how do you hire for it in the first place?
It's got to be much more conversational. I think this is where product leaders who have a high EQ and have a good reading on people are sort of uniquely placed to diagnose and to get a good sense. We all know there are hundreds of YouTube channels and techniques to go through the standard product management interview process. I think this is something that hiring managers have to adapt their hiring process to be a lot more evidence and anecdotal. When I think about the types of interviews of people who I've hired who've went really well, it's been automatic. One of the things that I gauge for when I'm hiring is how authentic is the storytelling. If I ask a product manager what their strategy was for the last company and they don't, they walk around the subject, that's an obvious tell. But the thing to me that is a true positive sign is it should be automatic. A product manager who has gone through their strategy, who has developed their strategy, rehearsed it, and pitched it 1,000 times more, you can ask them, what was your strategy for your last product? And it will be a robust story, and they will have personal anecdotes to talk through. So I think that is the big thing for me, which is how do we go or leverage more the soft skills of interviewing? Tell me about something that you shipped where it was really messy and it was valuable. You can tell when someone is faking their way through those sort of interviews because the delivery is much more authentic. It's much more smooth. There's less R's or filler words. And I think that's really the biggest thing to optimize for, which is no longer should the interview process, at least my interview process, being based on the cookie cutter FANG style interview questions. I'm not asking people the estimation questions. I'm getting their thought. I'm getting their work or their experiences from actual tangible stories to gauge whether they're the right culture add. Right, that's another big thing for me, which is you should be able to look at the components of your team and optimize for culture add, not culture fit. And I think you need to look at where you have the core traits of what you need to add into. But to me, it's all about soft skills. I think product management is heavily indexed on the soft skills. I've never met a great product manager who couldn't learn a new framework, but I have met product managers I wouldn't put in the top tier who were unable to display some of the soft skills that I would talk about.
So there's something there about attitude. There's something there about aptitude. And something there about experience. Do you need people to have already played with or shown some competency with the way that you're working, for example, with the hooking a design system up to an MCP server? Do they need to be using AI and LLMs to do their job? Or is that something that you're happy to teach if they've got other skills, if they've got the grit, if they are consistently delivering results?
I'll give you the typical product manager answer. It depends. It depends on what I'm hiring for.
I don't want no, not that. I want your answer.
Well, I think the answer to that is that I would always go for the soft skills. It helps. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't help to hire a product manager who at least has a basic understanding of the technologies, because teaching someone how to publish an MCP server, how to do AI evals, or how to manage context to avoid model drift over long data sets, all of that sort of stuff, I'd like to not teach. But ultimately, you've got to have someone who wants to learn. I think that is going to be something we see, a divide in product builders versus, product bureaucrats, as I call them, over the next sort of 3 years. It's the people who don't want to fight it, the people who want to embrace it. And even though they don't understand it and they don't, necessarily feel comfortable, it's the people who break through those barriers. That's the type of person I would want with me in a startup that, had 6 months left of runway and our backs were against the wall. At that point, I wouldn't be testing for someone how much AI knowledge they had. It would just be how comfortable are you being on the front line of developing in high stress situations of whether a product line or a company fails or succeeds.
I feel like it would be wrong of us not to talk about, given the topic that we are discussing, not to talk about the news of Sam Altman saying that there's an AI bubble happening right now and everything's going to go bust and blah, 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 blah. It does sort of feel like that, having lived through a few of these, the big data bubble and all of that kind of thing, I don't know, Web3, but Web3 never really happened, actually. Tried really, really hard, but actually didn't happen.
You can't say that. The VCs will all roll over in their whatevers.
But it does feel like where in previous times we've had, such kind of massive focus on a specific thing, this time around, it's almost like it's doing to itself what it does to everything else, and like hugely accelerating through this process of all of these startups kind of coming to life and then dying quite quickly, and the big ones shining through quite quickly because of the rate of change and the pace of change. As product managers, we've talked about how in order to stay on top of things, you need to learn everything and be experimenting with stuff. But how do you suggest people cope with all of the noise that's going on when in a year, probably, maybe 2, but probably a year, everything will kind of like settle in a little bit more?
Of course, there's a bubble. I mean, a year ago, it was startups that were building, some sort of qualitative tool that was hooked into the Open API from OpenAI. There's always going to be a bubble. I think it comes back to the base value. What problem are you solving that you're uniquely placed to solve? One of the things that I've been quite conscious of over the last couple of weeks has been the number of agentic IDEs. How many terminal-based code creators do we need? What is the difference between Codex and Claude Code versus so yeah, I think it all comes back to the problem that you're trying to solve. What are you uniquely positioned to solve better than anyone else? All of the code IDEs and browsers. We're about to see the next wave of AI native browsers. I've been trying Comet by Perplexity. I've been using Dia by the browser company. Tried a little bit of Edge. They're all based roughly on the same thing. It's that there is a chat assistant that has tabular context, but what is better than the other? What makes them stand out? For me, I've started using Dia over Comet because I just like how simplistic the UI is. It's not as blocky or as clunky. That's my personal design aesthetic. That's got nothing to do with the features. I didn't just say the model was better or give me features. I literally just said it looks nicer. So there's always going to be a bubble, and I think this is where, again, principles come back to it, which is what problem are you trying to solve? And I think product managers also need to be realistic about the company they're in or the product that they're working on in those environments of where, there is an expectation that we all need to, be militant and love the product that we're working on. I think that is nice when you are working in that and you're deeply connected with the product that you're working on. But in others, just recognizing you're in a business and your job is to optimize the strategy or the mission that you're aligning to because you were employed by them. I think that is where you start to draw the line of going back to, well, what are we uniquely positioned to do? How do we optimize the offering that we have? How do we take the insights that we have and develop a proposition that is, 10x more lovable or 10x more valuable than the competitor? So to me, it all just comes down to first principles. There is nothing unique about a lot of the products on the market at this stage in the bubble because we're over the early AI hype. What we're now seeing is a lot of products that basically do the same thing on the market that in 6 months' time or in 12 months' time won't exist. Where we'll be then is we would have stabilized on the bubble. The next thing would have been, brought out. ChatGPT-5 is a really good example of where everyone expects the innovation to be linear. Well, not many people are saying nice things about ChatGPT-5, but it was supposed to be the closest leap to, artificial general intelligence ever. Everyone's just saying, oh, it writes better code now. I don't like the tone of voice. So I think this is where we have to go back to aligning our expectations back to those first principles, which is what's solving your problem? How are you going to maximize that opportunity for your business rather than thinking that everything is going to be the next leap in human evolution?
Okay, and then I just want to, we probably have to wrap up now, but I just want to touch quickly on a few of the things that you've mentioned. So the antidote, I guess, to the state of product management now, I think you called out as kind of being pragmatic, resilient, emotionally detached, curious, focused, and humble. How do you encourage your teams and your product managers across all of those different areas? What's your kind of core piece of advice in order to practice those core sort of soft skills?
So I talk about it as a mental flywheel, and I think it starts with your mindset and the lens in which you view the world. And I think the two core traits there is pragmatism and curiosity. Be pragmatic about removing the abstraction layers. Looking at the things that are getting in your way, critically asking what is getting in your way, what is stopping us from doing better. Is what we're doing helping? How is this going to improve, the product or improve how we work? Once you have that lens and you're starting to ask the right questions, or the typical questions you'd expect a product manager to ask, that then sparks the behaviors. And I think the core behaviors there is a bias for action, and really focusing on, if you're asking the question of what is the most important thing to do, are you actually doing that thing? And go and do it. Having the creativity, because you're biasing for the action, how can you start to cut corners in terms of the things that are actively slowing you down? So taking creative approaches by skipping cookie cutter processes, or not following basic frameworks or checklists that you deem to be, not necessarily the most beneficial thing to the solution you're trying to get to. And I think that the final part of that flywheel is the lens in which you look through the world, the behaviors that you display. It's then refreshed through the resilience that you have. For me, people can endure other people who succeed. The people who have a high level of resilience and who have that emotional detachment from a stakeholder walks into everyone's office and says, your roadmap's going in the bin because I've spoken to one customer, they've given me this idea and this idea is going to change everything. The difference there between, someone who faces it with objectivity and with an emotional detachment doesn't then start to hate the place they work. Someone who can look at it on the face value of what it is and show calmness and pragmatism in the sense of, well, okay, this is the new direction in which we're going. We might not agree with it, but how do we optimize to make the best of it? Now, having worked in some companies that I would consider pretty good, that happens at top tier companies just as much as it happens at random startup. So I think that is one of the things that I'm actively teaching my team, which is, it's all about first principles. It's all about the questions you ask, the lens in which you view the world, the action that it sparks off the back of it, and how often you can, or how long you can keep going.
Amazing. Dan, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been so great chatting to you today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again, Dan. See you later.
See you.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer, and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.